Hello, Degrassi fans, and welcome to your episode of the Degrassi Kid podcast. What is it about Degrassi that attracts so many dedicated fans? Fans like you who listen to a Degrassi podcast even when they haven't made a single episode in over 5 years. I'm Jocelyn, and before I'm a Degrassi podcaster, I'm a Degrassi collector. I'll do anything I have to get my hands on authentic, one-of-a-kind Degrassi merch. Other Degrassi fans make maps. Brian Donnelly made it his mission to find every shooting location for Degrassi Junior High around the city of Toronto. He even made an online interactive map, making the show and the entire city come to life in only one single click. James Alexander was inspired by Degrassi to become a TV writer, and now he's living his screenwriting dreams in Los Angeles. He said, "Degrassi helped me out of a dark place and shaped the person I am." And he thanks the show for always telling stories that push tolerance, acceptance, and kindness. Rachel Scully ran an old-school Degrassi Facebook page where fans from the 80s came together and celebrated their timeless love for the show. Rachel writes Degrassi fan fiction, makes Degrassi fan art, and embodies everything it means to celebrate the show. You guys have listened to me for weeks now, so this time I want to celebrate some of the unseen and unheard Degrassi fans hiding in our community, and for the first time, hear their real stories on why Degrassi just means so much. We're going to hear from teachers and social workers who turned their love for the show into teaching moments for kids. As well, we'll chat with some of the most recognizable names in the Degrassi fan community. Carrie Degrassi, Aaron from Degrassi Online, Degrassi No Context, and even more. And we're going to ask all of them, what does Degrassi mean to you? And I'm so excited that I get to be the one to share all of their stories on the Degrassi Kid podcast. Our first guest is a true staple in the Degrassi fan community. In 2009, Carrie created the fan site DegrassiBlog.com. Today, we can connect to Degrassi fans, actors, news instantly. But back in the day, you really had to go digging on your family's bulky home computer if you wanted to find anything about Degrassi or even find other fans. So, Carrie wanted to create a single place where Degrassi fans could get in touch and stay up to date on the show. In season 10, Degrassi rebranded itself with the infamous Shark in the Water promo, and almost overnight, his website blew up. Quickly, Carrie's entire life became running a Degrassi fan blog. But why? Why was Degrassi so important to Carrie that he decided to dedicate his life to it? And how did it affect his mental health when the show suddenly got canceled without any warning?
When I first got into Degrassi, I had this comic book idea when I was a teenager, and I kind of drew comics for a while. And then one day when I was somewhere in college, I ended up discovering this show about these teenagers going through teen stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, this seems kind of like this comic book idea that I had. At the end, back in the day, they would run the marathons all the time. All it took was one weekend of that, and I was just immediately hooked. One of the things I wanted to do is go online and find out all this stuff about it. And the way to do that back in, it feels like decades ago, you would go to various fan sites or you would go on message boards. After a while, once you hit about season 7, all of these fan sites that had been huge back then in the early 2000s started fading away. So I wanted to keep one going. I actually thought about purchasing one of the big ones. I think it was called Degrassi, the Next Generation Hangout. But then instead of like purchasing that domain, I decided to just create DegrassiBlog.com. Degrassi was kind of basically outside of work, my only personality. This is a weird thing to say, but Degrassi getting canceled, abruptly at the end of 2017 and them not really saying anything kind of affected me in a weird way. In the fact that I'd poured so much of my time and energy into Degrassi, and it was basically the only thing I would think about or do anything about when I wasn't working. And then all of a sudden it gets ripped away. And I'm kind of left wondering, well, what do I do now? Like, who am I? And it's really sad to say that, but I think I poured a little bit too much of my identity into Degrassi. Right now, I'm in the mindset of, okay, well, do I want to go back to blogging and doing all the content creation stuff, or do I want to just kind of enjoy Degrassi? I think I've got like a year or so to figure that out, but I'm kind of on the fence at this point. Hopefully, a new generation of fans come along and do the awesome things that I've done and the awesome things that you're doing right now with your podcast.
Carrie's someone I remember from my early days of being a Degrassi fan. The same way he immediately ran online looking for Degrassi sites was the exact same experience for me. Except when I went looking, I found Carrie's Degrassi blog. Carrie also has had amazing fan opportunities and gives huge credit to Degrassi's social media director, Abby, and Degrassi's publicist, Ian. who, for the record, anytime you've ever seen me meeting Annie Clark or on a Degrassi Google Hangout, they're the ones who made it happen. But Carrie has an amazing story with the screenwriter James. They were given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that they just couldn't miss.
This happened a couple of years ago, which was out of the blue. So I get this email, and it's from some random person I'd never seen before. And it's an invitation that says, hey, Linda Schuyler and Steven Sohn invite you to this book release party. And they have this address. And I look it up, and it's like, wait a minute. I think this is at their house.
Oh my God.
So I thought it wasn't real at first. So I email Ian, who works in PR, to confirm, and he did. So I took the guy named, you might know him. His name is James. For the love of God, Degrassi, please hire him as a writer. But we end up going to this thing. From the second that we walk in, there are literally Degrassi people everywhere. I'm talking about people from Degrassi Next Class, Degrassi The Next Generation, Degrassi writers, production people. My head explodes because we're standing here, Linda and Steven's condo. We're completely surrounded by Degrassi people. So I don't know how or what I did to deserve getting invited to their house. That was just the most surreal experience that I have ever been a part of.
Can you even imagine? Oh my God. Erin Wilson is also the creator of a popular fan site called Degrassi Online, except her story is a little different. Erin started Degrassi Online in 2008 after the show went through a transition period. Original fan favorites like Manny, Emma, Spinner, Paige all graduated, and Degrassi needed to introduce new characters, a concept that now seems like a staple to the show, but back then caused a lot of friction in the fan community. Erin wanted a space for anyone who loved the entire show, including the new characters Claire, Casey, Allie, Connor, a space where they could get together and talk about the show in a positive way. But again, why? What was it about Degrassi that had Erin so dedicated to the show? And what made her fall in love with it in the first place?
I think it's just the core messaging of the show, this idea of you are not alone. And they've kept that from the very beginning, like from the kids of Degrassi Street all the way to, the last episode of Degrassi Next Class. It's funny because I wasn't like a huge Degrassi fan from the get-go. I remember my first introduction to Degrassi was when I was 12 years old at the time. My parents were huge fans of Degrassi Junior High. So when the show came back with The Next Generation, they were both so excited. At first, it didn't really leave much of an impression on me. In my 12-year-old mind, this was a show that my parents liked, which instantly made it seem uncool. Had no interest in watching it at all. The moment when Degrassi really took over my life, I was 16. There were two things that happened that year that really made me fall in love with the show. 2005 was the 25th anniversary of the Degrassi franchise. And so there was a lot of content being put out to celebrate this milestone. I remember there was a book that was released, and there was also a documentary that CTV made called The Degrassi Story. So watching this documentary really helped me learn the history of Degrassi, which to this day is one of the reasons why I love Degrassi so much. The longevity and the story of how it was created by a teacher, and made me appreciate the cultural and historical impact of the series. And then the second thing, Liberty is my favorite character from the TNG era. I really connected with her at the time. It's kind of funny to talk about now, but when I was 16, I had to start wearing glasses, and I felt so self-conscious about it. Liberty was like a girl on TV who wore glasses, and you just didn't see that. I just really connected with her, and it meant a lot to me when she became more of a main character. So that was really another big moment when I fully became Degrassi's #1 fan. The season 10 era, which also kind of coincided with this social media boom, was really incredible to watch. And like I said, when I created my website in 2008, Degrassi was at a bit of a crossroads. It was really a where do we go from here kind of moment for them. I remember before season 10 going to Degrassi events, and not that many people would show up, and overall vibe would be very chill. But then season 10 aired and everything changed. On social media, the show was becoming more popular. And there were also a lot of other Degrassi creators who became more prominent in the fandom. There was Carrie, and there was that guy who ran the Degrassi Nation Twitter account. One thing that I vividly remember from that time is that there was like this Degrassi event. I will never forget turning the corner and seeing this huge swarm of fans. And at first I thought we were in the wrong place. I was like, these people can't all be here just for Degrassi, right? But sure enough, they were. And it was all this new, younger generation of fans, and they were screaming and crying. And it was just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Getting to be part of that and to watch that happen, it was just really rewarding.
If you want to hear more from my conversation with Carrie and Aaron, you can go to my Patreon page linked in the description. We talk about some of the most controversial moments in Degrassi's fan history, like when someone leaked photos that spoiled a huge plotline, and the chaos of when The Next Generation was canceled and brought back as Degrassi Next Class. But next, with over 30,000 followers, super followers, and recognition from the cast, I'm confident if you follow any Degrassi fans online, it's probably these ones. The popular Twitter account Degrassi No Context was created by best friends Emily and Haley. Emily had watched Degrassi before, but Haley was introduced when they were both studying abroad in the Netherlands. They didn't have access to their regular TV shows from home, but Degrassi was free and accessible on YouTube. So together, they sat down and watched from the beginning. But Haley and Emily still didn't see themselves as these huge Degrassi fans. I mean, they didn't even finish watching the series. All they had was a fun idea, and the rest was up to fate and friendship.
Like, we were just watching this and we thought, you know, I know the show's known for its serious moments, that it goes there, but so many of these lines would be wild out of context.
Absolutely.
We're like, let's just put it on Twitter, maybe for the 5 people in our friend group.
We would just be like, oh, this would be a funny thing to post. And it was so informal. And then around season 2, Lauren Collins retweeted us and a couple other people. And that was when all of a sudden we had a couple thousand and we're like, uh-oh, we might have to take this seriously now.
I think part of it was timing. We started the account only a few months before the pandemic. I think Degrassi has always been a comfort show for a lot of people. None of us could have predicted how much of a powerful tool nostalgia would be.
We also got really lucky. Like, the pandemic hit and we had just started posting season 10, which obviously is a big season for a lot of people. Around that time, for like the first 2 or 3 months of COVID, we were getting 100 followers a day, which we never anticipated. It was really nice for us, I will say, because we had lived together for all 4 years of college. And then when the pandemic hit, we were forced to leave our apartment in Boston and go home. It was the longest we'd ever been apart since we met each other. And I think it was just like a really awesome way. It was an excuse for us to talk every day more than anything. And it still is. I mean, we live across the country from each other now. We're in different time zones. I think it would be a lot harder for us to talk every day if we didn't have this thing. But like, Haley's the first person I talk to every day because of Degrassi No Context. And like, I really think that's what pushes us to keep going when it gets frustrating, is that it's just like the thing that like helps us keep our friendship even stronger.
It's almost hard to describe even on a podcast how attached at the hip we were all 4 years of college. like Emily said, we would have obviously stayed together and continued talking without it, but it's just been a really great excuse to keep talking while we're across the country from each other.
Oh my God, yeah. One of my favorite things about running the account and telling people in real life, everyone's response to me is always, oh my God, that's the show where, and then they'll name the one episode they remember. And of course, a lot of the time it's the popular things, the show Drake got shot on. Sometimes it's like, that's the first time I learned what abortion was. Or I had someone say to me the other day, that's the show where that girl had French fries in her pocket. Like, it's so funny to me to hear the one episode that people really cling on to. It's just awesome.
Yeah, I love hearing just people's stories of, especially whenever anyone says, oh, this is the first time I saw myself on TV. Like, I love that. That's such a powerful thing. I know from a personal perspective, I'm ace, and that's something I've never really had. And so I know what it's like not seeing myself on TV, and it's tough.
I loved chatting with these girls. When I asked them to be on the podcast, I thought we were just going to chat about a popular Twitter account. I didn't know that we were going to uncover this story of how Degrassi brought their close friendship even closer. On Twitter, Degrassi No Context also has a super follower option, which I am a proud member of, by the way. You can get early access to content they make, be a part of fan polls, and maybe even hear some censored opinions that don't make it on the public timeline. Now, if you're a Degrassi fan on TikTok, you've probably seen a viral video of a Degrassi-themed birthday party. For Jamie, she had one request for her 22nd year. Everyone has to dress up like a character from Degrassi. And it didn't stop there. The drinks, the decor, the games they played were all themed on her favorite TV show. Jamie binged watched Degrassi Next Class on Netflix, and after falling in love with the show, she decided to go back and learn about its history and all these Next Class characters like Maya and Miles, who originally started on The Next Generation. So how did Jamie go from casually finding Degrassi on Netflix to being a viral Degrassi fan?
I was like, I want to do a Degrassi party. And usually me and my roommates, we love to do themed parties and like dressing up. But I was like, can we please do Degrassi? And they were all so into it because I've made them all watch Degrassi with me. I showed it to them during the pandemic, but they like it. One of my roommates immediately was like, I want to be Jay Hogarth because he's her favorite. And I knew I wanted to do the Manny song outfit because I was like, it's an iconic outfit. They've all seen enough of the show to like have favorite characters or characters that they relate to. And so we had Sean, Ellie, Alex, Mia, Fiona, Bianca, and Allie. And we had a shark in the water cocktail. It's like a blue Hawaiian. And then I decided to add gummy sharks to it just to really go for the shark in the water reference. Yeah, and my roommates and friends, they all decorated while I was upstairs. They made me go wait upstairs while they decorated. So I wasn't involved with the decorating at all. That was all the surprise. Warned them beforehand. I was like, I have quite a few TikTok ideas I want to make while we're all dressed up. And they were all so down. Comments are all really positive, saying like, you all killed it, this is great, I love Degrassi, like this is so fun, I wish I had friends like this.
Jamie's TikTok will be linked in the description along with all the other Degrassi fans we hear from today. And Jamie wanted to note she actually made the hat that she's wearing in the video and may start an Etsy shop because of all the positive reviews she's gotten in the comments. The trend of best friends getting together to celebrate their love for Degrassi is also exemplified by our next guest. Jasper and Bridget are the hosts of a Degrassi podcast called The Social Disease, a reference to the time Emma gets gonorrhea and says the infamous line, "You gave me a social disease," and also works as a nod to the pandemic being a social disease of its own. But why? What was it about the Degrassi fan community that inspired Jasper and Bridget to make their own podcast? And has it affected their friendship so far?
For me, I always just love talking about Degrassi, and engaging with the Degrassi community is always so fun. I remember there was the Degrassi Tumblr community. I would go into the Degrassi tag like every day, reading through the analyses. Now it's Degrassi Twitter. Degrassi kind of went through a renaissance because of like Degrassi No Context and it being on YouTube. And I was like, so Bridget, let's do a Degrassi podcast.
Jasper's done a really good job at building up the Twitter. We've gotten DMs from people like saying, I love your podcast. Like, this is something that like I listen to all the time. It's more rewarding than I expected. I kind of thought it would just be like Jasper and I talking into the air. We've had like a solid amount of people like listening and responding, and it's pretty good.
What really struck me is a message we got probably like a week ago from somebody who said they have nobody to talk to about Degrassi at home. And they kind of use our podcast as a way to have virtual friends, I guess, to talk to and listen to about the podcast. That really struck me because that's kind of how I felt. I used to be the person who was kind of listening and kind of engaging with other people's content.
It's just like nice having something that keeps us connected, easily like the most rewarding part of it. I know. I mean, Jasper and I have been friends since like 7th grade, 6th grade. Like, 2006, 2007. Like, it's been a long time. And this is like absolutely it.
God, Bridget, you just showed me up. I can't follow that up. For me, it's how we never run out of things to talk about. Like, but yeah, I kind of view it as a book club. We get together every week, every 2 weeks. With so many decades of episodes and material, there's always something new that people are discussing. One day it'll be like, oh, Melanie and Snake should have gotten together in Degrassi Junior High. In like the next tweet after that, it'll be like, we were robbed of Esme's arc at the end of Next Class. I never get bored of just scrolling through Degrassi Twitter because there's always new takes on something that I hadn't thought about.
Everybody's opinions on everything are just so good.
And also just the fact that the community is still so active. Like, there hasn't been Degrassi in like 5 years now. And the fact that the fans are still so dedicated and still engaging with the show just shows how dedicated the Degrassi fans are.
The Social Disease podcast is all about exploring Degrassi's themes and relationships on the show, as well analyzing the choices of Degrassi writers and how those choices affect character arcs over the entire series. You can listen to their podcast on Spotify and Apple, but only after you've listened to mine first. Before we go on to meet even more dedicated Degrassi fans, there's two that I want to introduce you to. I want to take a moment to shout out my newest Patreon subscribers. Randy Carter and Kimberly Warren both signed up this week as ultimate Degrassi fans. They'll get exclusive access to bonus content, like extended interview footage. They can ask future guest questions, and even more. So thank you very much to Randy and Kim. Most Degrassi fans were introduced to Degrassi Next Class or Degrassi The Next Generation, but we can't forget where Degrassi came from. The Kids of Degrassi Street started in 1979. It was followed by Degrassi High and Degrassi Junior High in 1987. And for Julia Grant, growing up and watching the original Kids of Degrassi Street meant more than just tuning into a regular TV show. For Julia, there was a deeper connection that made Degrassi even more special.
My parents are best friends with Louis Manny and Wendy Watson. They were the music composers for the very, very first Kids of Degrassi Street. What would happen on set is they'd be filming and we're like, oh, we need an extra. We don't have an extra. And Louis was always, I'll do it. The first memory of Degrassi I have is I think I was maybe 5 or 6, I can't remember. And I was watching the episode Cookie Goes to the Hospital. This episode was done and I was like, okay, whatever, that's good. And my parents made me sit and watch the credits until we saw Louis Manny, Wendy Watson. And to this day, if I watch a rerun of Degrassi, I wait until I see their name.
Louis Manny and Wendy Watson played a huge role in the beginning of Degrassi. Louis played a slew of small roles and background characters, and Wendy played Degrassi schoolteacher Miss Gonzalez. And it didn't stop with the Kids of Degrassi Street. Together, they wrote some of the most recognizable songs in Degrassi's history. The theme song for both Degrassi High and Degrassi Junior High, which were sung by Wendy, and get this, they even wrote Everybody Wants Something by the Zit Remedy. And Julia's parents weren't just best friends with Louis and Wendy, their relationship was so close that Julia knows them better as her aunt and uncle.
When I got married, instead of like a receiving line when people walked into the reception, we were so loud. Every time somebody walked in, me and the wedding party would go, hey, and we'd clap. But when my aunt and uncle entered, my entire wedding party sang, wake up in the morning, feeling shy and lonely. Gee, I gotta go to school. And get this. And then she joined in singing the song with my bridal party. I just remember it exploding into this huge thing because one day nobody knew anything about it. And then the next day it was like massively huge. And I couldn't believe it. I remember I had on a t-shirt that said Kids of Degrassi Street. And somebody said, oh my God, are you on that show? Which I thought was amazing. Wendy was actually a high school music teacher in Toronto when I was in elementary school, and they had albums that came out in the 80s, and we used to go to their album release parties when I was like a kid. And I remember Kit Hood was at one of those album release parties.
Wendy and Louis's love of music made such an impact on Julia growing up that she's now a high school music teacher herself. But Julia's connection to the show wasn't just through her aunt and uncle. She was also a true, genuine fan, just like the rest of us.
The junior high series and the high series, I was the same age as the kids that I was watching. That to me was super, super important. And another thing that was important too, because in the 90s, 90210 was coming out, Saved by the Bell was out as well. But the thing with those shows is that all those people were drop dead gorgeous. I mean, that's part of the reason why you watch 90210. Like, hello, Dylan McKay, like he was very attractive. I was very awkward. I was 6 foot by the time I was in grade 8 and had bad acne. Watching Degrassi and seeing these kids that are awkward, you know what I mean? They had a bad hair day. They had acne. They were like real kids. And I was just like, those are things that I can relate to.
If you want to hear more from Julia and how she hooked me up with some original Kids of Degrassi Street merch, you can listen over on the Degrassi Kid Podcast Patreon page. And speaking of, I have to say a big thank you to everyone who's already supporting my Patreon as an ultimate Degrassi fan. Rachel Miller, Lucy Schwent, Brittany Brown, Stevie Gerwa, Ashley, Sarah J, Annie Clark, Teal Joyce, and Evie's Treasures are all signed up to help my dreams come true to bring you a Degrassi podcast every single week. So thank you guys so much. Our next guest has one of the most remarkable personal connections to Degrassi. Steve Emerson is a social worker who was inspired by the show to help kids in need. But his love extends beyond inspiration. Steve also incorporates Degrassi into the lesson he teaches to his kids.
Degrassi is important to me because it helped me navigate life at a time where I was just so unsure of who I was. To see characters going through similar issues and just making their own choices and figuring it out, like, really shaped my worldview and helped me deal and cope with things that I didn't think I could cope with to begin with. I became a Degrassi fan sometime around season 4. When I was in high school, I had a lot of anxiety. I came out when I was in 8th grade. I had a social worker who I was very close with. She helped me through a lot. And then with Degrassi, I really connected with Marco. Marco was really that character that, like Fiona for you, Marco really mirrored my life and what I was going through at the time. So that I was just kind of thinking back to my life, and I'm like, what inspired me? And I was thinking about my high school social worker and Degrassi and just how important those messages were. And then kind of just from there, I'm going to go back to grad school and become a social worker and then become a therapist. I'm going to help people the way I was helped. It's not where I thought I was going to be, but it just feels right that I'm here. And I owe a lot of that to Degrassi, which is insane. I knew that it was a show that was tailored for teens and adolescents. As a social worker, you look back and you can really appreciate it from that lens and how smart it is to be able to speak to kids of a certain age in a way that they understand and feel respected. I actually used Degrassi as a social worker. I worked in the foster care system. I had a few kids on my caseload that I was kind of counseling and working with. And one of my boys that I was working with, he lived in a group home. And as we know, in Degrassi, we have a character, Casey, who lived in a group home. So it inspired me to create kind of a multi-part lesson plan. I created I think I picked 5 or 6 episodes. One of them I did on friendship, and it was when Spinner stole Jimmy's iPod. And then I did one on body image, and it was Toby trying to make weight for wrestling. The very last one I know is I did a Casey episode about him being embarrassed about being in a group home. And here I was working with 5 or 6 kids. I'm in their group home with them and we're talking about it, and they really connected to the story. And I don't know, I'm almost gonna get choked up talking about it. But it was just so inspiring to see that magic happen and that connection. If any Degrassi people are listening to this, thank you. You do amazing work.
It was so impactful to talk to Steve about his story, and I'm so happy he was open to sharing it with you guys. We just found each other on the internet, and I've quickly fallen in love with his enthusiasm and love for just making the world a better place. The only way I can describe our next guest is Linda Schuyler reincarnated. Nikki Petter is a teacher who uses Degrassi in her lesson plans. Similar to Steve, she takes moments from the show and asks her kids to reflect on these issues in the real world and how they affect them. But first, why Degrassi? Why was this the show that made such an impact?
I became a Degrassi fan around age 12 or 13 when I turned on the TV and I saw Paige Michael Chuck realizing that she was bisexual or struggling with that bisexuality. And similar to your story, I froze and I was like, what is this? Because I right away realized that everything she was feeling is what I was feeling as well. And I had no concept of what Degrassi was. I had never even heard of it before, but I sat there and I watched her for the next half an hour say everything that I had ever felt. And from that day forward, I was hooked as a kid and as a teen. And then as an adult, I was actually able to rediscover Degrassi through you, interestingly enough.
Oh my gosh.
I saw one of your TikToks earlier this year, and you just talking about Degrassi and showing stuff in your room. And I thought, you know what, let's just binge it. So I started at season 1 and went all the way to present day within about a month. Yeah, and as a teacher, I right away saw the value in what I was seeing because I heard the same conversations in my classroom that I was hearing on the Degrassi episodes. And I was like, okay, I need to find a way to combine this in my classroom now. I work with a mental health classroom. So keeping that in mind, I'm super cognizant of their mental health and what they're going through. So I thought it was a great opportunity in my classes to introduce some of the similar themes that I've seen in my classroom with Degrassi. I teach English. I start introducing Degrassi in our short story units, analyzing plot, characters, conflict, literary devices. It goes on and on. Different students in my class were assigned to different episodes, and I differentiated those episodes based on what the students were going through at that time in their personal lives. So one of my students was coming out of the closet at the time and discovering his queerness. I would look at episodes that included maybe Marco, Miles, Tristan, Zoe, Riley, or your girl Fiona Coyne.
Yeah, there we go.
And if I had students that were transgender and in the midst of transitioning, then maybe I would look at episodes more with Adam Torres in them. Or if students had family members going through divorce, then I could show episodes with Ashley or Claire Edwards even. I tried to really use Degrassi as a tool, both educationally and through the curriculum, but also as the deeper meaning that can be found in the episodes and showing them something that's relatable, that even though they're going through something really hard, it's completely normal for them to feel these ways.
So how have your students reacted to all this?
My students are huge Degrassi fans, actually, and they're the ones that were my number one cheerleaders when I said that I was going to be on your podcast. And they were like,
my God.
No, you're going to be on it. So in my classroom, you're actually a little bit famous.
Oh my God. Okay. That is an honor. Yeah. I had no idea. I didn't realize that I was such an influence in you getting back into Degrassi. Like I had no idea.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the enthusiasm you had that made me really excited myself to go back and rewatch it. And then sometimes I would just watch an episode and take it in being like, that was nice. And then I listened to one of your TikToks or one of your podcast episodes and you go in depth and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good episode actually.
Oh my God.
And it gets me excited to find out how I can put it into a lesson plan or what episodes in particular my students might resonate with. So thank you, Jocelyn.
Oh my God. Yeah, I did not expect this. I did not expect to do this podcast right now and just feel so immediately flattered. Oh my God.
I love those guys so much. They make my job so much more fun. And I'm so excited that I can be on here representing them in a way.
Well, shout out to your class as well. Like I am so honored.
Thank you. Thank you for incorporating me. It's such a cool thing to not only subscribe to Patreon, but actually get to be involved in all the behind the scenes things too, like interviews and having questions answered. That's so cool. I just appreciate everything you've done for the community in general.
Oh my God. Listen to this promo. Thank you so much. That's definitely going in. I had absolutely no idea about the way I influenced Nikki as a Degrassi fan until we sat down to have this conversation. If she seems familiar, it's because last week Nikki sent in a question for Annie Clark, asking what impactful moments in Degrassi should I show my students. Even then, I had no clue Nikki and I were so connected to each other. I came up with this episode idea about fans who have unique stories and thought, hey, I should reach out to Nikki. I never would have guessed that I would sit down and hear a story about how I had such a huge influence over another Degrassi fan, especially one who's now making a difference in her own community. And I mean, it's not just me. The Social Disease podcast was influenced by Degrassi No Context. Aaron and Carrie from the Degrassi fan sites shared stories about how they were able to visit the Degrassi set together, despite not knowing each other outside of the show. The Degrassi community is really incredible, and I feel so lucky that I get to be a part of it. Just a few days ago, I made a TikTok about a little library up the street. I thought, how cool would it be if I donated a Degrassi book and found a nearby fan? Less than 1 day later, I heard from Ethan, who watches my TikToks and listens to my podcast. Hi, Ethan. He lives just up the street, and when he recognized we share that same little library, he ran to it right away, and he sent me a message. He said he's watched Degrassi since the 6th grade and became a super fan with the character Miles. He even said, Miles is to me what Fiona is to you. Aww. He also told me that Miles' anxiety helped him realize what he was going through and that he needed to get help. Ethan also shared with me that he eventually stopped watching Degrassi, but after stumbling onto my TikTok page, he went back and watched the original 80s series for the very first time. I can't express to you how much these stories and working on this podcast episode has meant to me. Each person I sat down with took the time to tell me how my podcast or my TikToks or just my general love for Degrassi has made a positive impact on them. Every day I feel recognized and celebrated in this community, and I'm so happy that I could make this podcast to celebrate and recognize other fans who use their love for the show to make a positive difference. Whether they're making safe spaces online for fans to talk about their love for the show on blogs and podcasts, Twitter accounts, and viral birthday videos, whether they quietly sat back and watched the real history of Degrassi unfold and now share that enthusiasm with fans like you and me, or if they use Degrassi as a learning tool to teach real kids they're not alone. Every Degrassi fan makes a difference, and I'm so proud that I get to be one of them. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your voices and your stories on the Degrassi Kid podcast. Thanks, guys.